And this session and this whole conversation series, it's part of the GFCC path that will take us to the Global Innovation Summit in November 2022 in Athens and Ioannina in Greece. This whole series and the summit are being deployed in partnership with our partners, the Delphi Economic Forum and the Council on Competitiveness of Greece. We'll have a chance to review a bit about the session and our speakers, but before we do that, I want to turn to our president, president of the GFCC, Deborah Winston-Smith. Deborah is joining us from the United States to help us frame this session. Deborah, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. And it's my great pleasure to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our distinguished speakers, as well as our participants from around the world. As Dr. Alvarez said, this is a third in a series of discussions paving the way to GFCC 2022 in Athens, Greece, from local to global on competitiveness. And we're very, very excited about this annual meeting and the summit we will have in Athens. Some of you know I am by background and training a Bronze Age Aegean archaeologist. So having the GFCC in Greece with our partners, the Delphi Economic Forum and Compete Greece, Mr. Simeon Simokis and Dr. Simos Anastonopoulos is a great personal pleasure for me as well as professionally. Today, our distinguished speakers hail from Malaysia, from the United Arab Emirates, and from Greece. We're going to address competitiveness priorities in the context of the challenges and opportunities we confront today with a myriad of new realities impacting the global economy, and really discussing how our respective nations and regions are really going to be responding and dealing with these profound changes, but also, again, possibilities that will drive our future economic growth, inclusive prosperity, and security. Of course, we're still emerging and hope finally coming out soon of the global pandemic, but the issues around health and the response to health will continue to be of great priority to all nations and regions. We saw tremendous innovation occurring during the pandemic, the light side of a great global trial. But at the same time, we have to deal with other challenges now, such as the global energy crisis, from shortage and cost to supply disruptions accelerated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also as part of the ongoing energy transformation, taking us to a zero carbon world. We've seen huge impact, of course, on how the energy crisis is impacting nations, supply chains, and individual households, accelerating as well the unprecedented inflation that's occurring. Again, in the United States, Europe, the numbers are very high and very much impacting developing nations as well. We have, of course, the ongoing imperative to address global challenges such as climate change and how we build sustainability writ large into all of our activities, from production and energy, but to how we make our choices and go about food production, et cetera, et cetera. And then adding to all of this is the ever accelerating development and deployment of the disruptive exponential technologies that are reshaping our world and our life, including, very importantly, the future of work and how we will develop and train a skilled workforce that can contribute and prosper in a new world of great digital transformation that's happening before our eyes. As Dr. Alvaro said, the GFCC has had a very dynamic set of thought leadership and work that produced the Frame the Future dialogue and our report of recommendations around 5 strategic pillars: innovation, sustainability, inclusiveness, resilience, and partnership. And so today, this leadership conversation is going to address these from the perspective of priorities. Dr. Alvarez will introduce more formally each of our speakers, but I want to say it's a great pleasure for me to have 2 very dear friends and colleagues with us today and meet 2 new colleagues. But let me introduce Dr. Zachary Abdul Hamid. He's the joint chairman of the Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology. He has an incredible background Zachary, we were so honored when you and your colleagues hosted the GFCC Global Innovation Summit in Kuala Lumpur in 2017, and delighted to be with you and thrilled you're coming to Athens. And Dr. Ray Johnson, who is the CEO of the recently established Technology Innovation Institute of Abu Dhabi. And Dr. Johnson, again, bringing an incredible background as a technology leader, CTO of Lockheed Martin, having been a leading partner in Bessemer Ventures. I know that you're already building a world-class institution that will reshape the innovation capabilities in Abu Dhabi in the Middle East. And then our new friends today, Michael Dritzis and Katerina Kramatasis. I know both of you are going to add tremendous amount in your roles in the Cabinet Office of the Ministry of Development and as a professor and head of a venture fund. And I know, Michael, we're going to hear also, I hope, about the great transformations in Greece on how you're investing in R&D and capitalizing on the great talent of the Greek people. So with that, let me turn it back to you, Roberto, and thank everyone for joining today for this exciting discussion on the way to Greece 2022.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. Amazing introduction. As said, we have an amazing group of people here today. And Deborah mentioned our Frame the Future series. We published a report that we will share here in the chat with all of you who are joining us today. We published that at the end of 2021. In December 2021, we stated 10 goals to advance those 5 dimensions: innovation, sustainability, resilience, inclusiveness, and partnerships. I'll just recap a few things. When we talk in innovation, we talk a lot about speed. For instance, how could we make the speed observed during the pandemic the standard for innovation process? I know that you, Ray, you talk a lot about it, speed. So it's a great cue. When we talk sustainability, we talk for sure carbon pricing, but also we talked about R&D. How could we expand the pipeline of clean tech technologies around the globe and boost investment in that? When we talked inclusiveness, we talked bringing people into the innovation economy, providing the infrastructures, the skills, the devices that are needed in the digital economy for people to be productive and part of that. So it's against that backdrop that we will talk about priorities here today. Deborah has mentioned a bit about our guests. I just want to highlight a bit more. Zachary Abdul Hamid, Professor Zachary, is the chief scientist for the Campaign for Nation. He's known for being a being very active in the conservation space. He was part of the advisory board of the Secretary General of the United Nations. He has served on a variety of capacities around the globe. He now is again the co-chair of MITE in Malaysia. And he had university appointments. He was the founder and chair of various universities. He's a fellow of the Academy of Sciences of Malaysia, the Academy of Sciences of the Developing World, in a variety of other capacities. Michael, joining us from Malaysia, is the chief of staff of the Ministry of Development, Investment, Research, and Technology Innovation from Greece. And so he's the person who is the chief of staff for the Greek vice minister, overseeing that portfolio, really advancing. He has knowledge translation in Greece. He has worked as a policy advisor to 2 ministers, to deputy ministers of development in Greece, has seen the process that Greece is going through. He comes with a background in engineering and operations research. That's something we have in common, Michael, at least in my previous life. Dr. Ray Johnson, who is the CEO of the Technology Innovation Institute, and Deborah has mentioned about his background. This is a new institute that was recently created in the UAE and already has, if I'm not wrong, around 500 staffers working and building a world-class research organization. Ray comes with an amazing background in technology. He was an operating partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, a top-tier venture capital firm. He was the chief technology officer for Lockheed Martin Corporation, overseeing a massive engineering company and massive engineering enterprise. He's a fellow of the International Society of Optical Engineers, an academician of the International Academy of Astronautics, and a variety of other capacities. Katerina, who is a founding partner of the Unifund, is a university professor turned into venture capitalist, an amazing trajectory, I would say. Unifund, it's a VC company that really wants to accelerate knowledge transfer, knowledge translation in Greece, working with universities and helping and then to transition, let's say, entrepreneurs who are coming out of universities to going into the market. She serves as an associate professor at the Athens University of Economics and Business. She's a founder of a tech accelerator and more. So having said that, I really want to turn to go for our initial round and ask all of you, what are the priorities today to advance competitiveness, and how can you translate those things into practice? Ray, I want to get it started with you.
Okay, thank you so much, Roberto and Deborah. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to the group that joined us today. I think when Deborah and I traveled for STS and other places, we talked about the UN SDGs. And I think some of the SDGs at the time didn't feel that real. And yes, there was a competitive need, but the competitiveness discussions tended, I think, to be more about national competitiveness. And I think, as you pointed out, Deborah, in your introductory comments, there are a number of challenges that the world faces today that are common to everyone. And I think the UN SDGs kind of brought this out as they highlighted some of the issues that, again, I don't think we saw in the early days, maybe the last decade or so. We knew that they were real, but we didn't see them manifesting themselves. Trust me, they're here now, right? And you mentioned a few of them, the global supply chain challenges, some of the dependencies that nations have on each other for energy. That's a great example that's going on today in Europe, the energy dependence. But I think one of the ideas around global competitiveness that may be different is competitiveness is still very important, but I think also is the idea of a win-win. And that is, how can nations work together to take on these global challenges that everyone faces, as opposed to, I think people use the term competitiveness and they tend to think of economic competitiveness only, when in fact, we all face global challenges and we all need to work together. And I think, I live in the UAE now, and the UAE, I think, is doing an amazing job of striking that balance as a global partner, as bringing in partners from around the world in a leadership supported environment. And the last thing I'll comment on is, I guess, innovation, and certainly TI. And by the way, Roberto, there are about 610 people now, so it's difficult to keep up because we're growing rapidly, which is great. But I think if you look at innovation and the support for innovation, and using TI as the example, how is success being, how are we able to grow? How are we able to meet the challenges that we're meeting in 6 specific priority sectors? And we're doing that, I think, because we have the leadership support at the top. And so I think an innovation agenda, which Deborah has in the Council on Competitiveness in the US has been supporting for many years, also providing the resources that are necessary. Again, something that Deborah and the Council have been asking Congress for, to make sure that the resources are provided. Being able to attract top talent, that's also important. And here, it's a global institute with 600 people. We actually have today 62 nationalities represented in those over 600 people. And so it is indeed a global institute. And I think these are some of the elements of success for innovation, which I think people realize is an important component to competitiveness. And again, trying to create that win-win environment.
So thank you, Ray. This is amazing. And for all of you who are interested, not just about our conversation here, but maybe learning more, we are releasing today a new GFCC report. It covers discussion, a forum that we had in March 2022, and it includes an interview with Ray, where you can find more information about TII and how they are really moving fast. So Katarina, I want to turn to you and talk a bit about maybe building on talent, but this notion of priorities, and how do you see priorities in Greece today?
Thank you, Roberto, first of all for the invitation and for this great question. You ask how we see priorities today, and the overall question you had is how can we be practical and actually contribute to becoming competitive in these turbulent times. And I think in order to address both your questions, the answer is the same. The answer is innovation. In order to be competitive, we need to innovate. But innovation needs a system. So in the same way we have an education system, we need a system for innovation. Early on to help the talent and students already as early as the high school, even earlier, build the right skills and the right mindset. Then while at university, we need to provide not just learnings and courses, but also a system and processes to help them innovate, further develop their skills through incubators, acceleration programs, competitions to inspire young people. And then the talent coming out of university, whether these are students or student teams, or these are researchers or people later on during their masters, give them the opportunity to really implement ideas into practice. And this further requires a system. This would be proof of concept programs, pre-seed and seed financing, and then further financing to make this happen. So we cannot just expect innovation to happen on its own. We need to really create the system around it and help it from the beginning, from A to an exit, as Michalis really likes to say. So in order to make this happen, we need to create this type of systems, I think, in every different geography. I think we're really happy and lucky currently in Greece because the Greek ecosystem, the Greek innovation system is now maturing a lot more than it used to be. I think both me, Michalis, and many of us are part of this ecosystem trying to help it mature. The fact we have great talent in Greece, good, well-educated people and great minds, pairing it with and helping mature the innovation ecosystem can have a clear practical contribution in the country's competitiveness. And I think this is really happening now. And maybe I can just close by saying another thing that makes Greece really be very competitive globally nowadays in addressing these challenges is the 10 years experience we have on our shoulders in respect to crisis. So we are really trained how to confront crisis here in Greece. So we have built these skills already for the last 10 years, pairing this knowledge and resilience we have in the country with the maturing innovation ecosystem and let's say the challenges that are ahead of us. I think we can expect much better times in Greece than we used to in the last years.
Thank you so much, Katarina. So innovation, you need to put the pieces together and to connect those to have a system. We'll have a chance to explore that with everybody. And you mentioned this skill that you can develop through crisis that really connects well with something that we are cooking in the GFCC or new innovating out of crisis initiative. So we'll have a chance to talk a bit about that. Professor Zachary, over to you. How do you see competitiveness priorities today? Ray got us started mentioning SDGs, something that I know are very important in your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just like to align myself to the views that Ray just put. I think the priorities today then would be how the global community could react and eventually achieve those 17 SDGs. And as we know, we are not doing too well on that, in particular, coming out of COVID-19, there are already challenges beyond not only public health, but socio-economic advancement. And here, I think when you talk about resilience, the challenge is how do we build national capabilities, in particular among young people, and already reflecting back on COVID, the impact is so tremendous. Businesses closing, young people out of jobs, I just dread to be a political leader, or which I'm not, because it is very challenging indeed. Uh, on that background, like a country like Malaysia, we are one of the 17 top trading nations of the world, really. And we market our products. Of course, Malaysia is quite well placed in electronics and electrical. We export a lot of those semiconductor chips. But one aspect of priorities or challenges facing Malaysia is our commodity. I'm here talking about the palm oil, which is a strong economic pillar for Malaysia. Friends, we talk about SDG #1, poverty alleviation. In fact, Malaysia has been practicing that since 40 years ago, when the government during independence in 1957 introduced the scheme of land for the landless and job for the jobless. And it really alleviated poverty. About 500,000 families were brought out of poverty when it was at 49% in 1970. It was reduced to less than, about 15% today, poverty. But the challenge here, Roberto, is how do you balance development with respect for the environment, conservation? And we got a lot of problems from the global community when we see pictures of orangutan or some wildlife being threatened. So that is the challenge, boycott or threat of boycott from countries like the European Union, when in actual fact, palm oil, for instance, has been a savior for people here. Finally, I think talking about resilience again, I think friends here agree that education is the great equalizer. Of course, education, we talk a lot about STEM, but also about critical thinking, and this is where it relates to innovation. It doesn't matter what you learn, but if you imbue critical thinking among young people in particular, I think we are still hopeful for a good future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zachary. I think that you have underscored this need for a common language related to SDGs, but also the need for action. And we'll be back to that. You connected us, you highlighted also the importance of resilience as a priority, but also as a skill, as a capability. And we will have a chance to get back to that. Michaelis, I want to turn to you. How do you see competitiveness priorities today from where you are seated, managing the R&D, research, innovation portfolio, and how to translate those priorities into practice?
Thank you very much for the kind invitation and the opportunity to be among such a distinguished panel. As far as your question is concerned, Greece has recently established a strategic foresight special secretariat, which reports directly to the Prime Minister, and which is the highest political level, and focuses on horizon scanning, weak signals identification, trend detection, multiple scenario planning, sense making, priority setting, and resilience analysis. So their work is very valuable work for us. Actually, I participate also in that team, but it's a big team of experts in which we try to see what the future lies for us ahead. And we have spotted the 7 megatrends. Among them are climate change, resource scarcity, demographic imbalances, urbanization, rapid technological developments, the shift of the global economic power, and the growth of middle class and the consumption on a global level. Bearing all those in these megatrends in mind, the formation of a competitive strategy of today, addressing the challenges of tomorrow, the Greek government, among others, relies its competitive strategy in investing in technology and innovation, in human capital, in talented academics, researchers, and business people, and of course in our research infrastructures. And our main target is to liaise our excellent research within our academic institutions with the Greek industry, because we see that there is a gap. And in our effort to bridge this gap, I will give you a few examples of what we are doing about that. We are heavily investing in research and innovation collaboration projects between industry and academia. We have increased the tax super deduction rate from 130% to 200% in order to provide stronger incentives to the businesses to invest in R&D. We invested in the formation of a national startup registry for the very first time. We call it Elevate Greece, aiming to support the startups in order to become scale-ups, to become more resilient and more competitive. We already have 2 unicorns, and we expect 10 unicorns. We have invested in 6 equity funds for startups. We invested in 22 innovation clusters and 11 competence centers. We established a center to empower innovation for women. We also invested in technology transfer offices in 2 cohorts, one for the early stage and another one is for the grown-ups. We streamlined the legislative framework for spin-off company formation and their growth. And we also work on the intellectual property rights front together with Katerina and colleagues of her. Also we invest in bilateral research and innovation cooperations with Germany, Israel, China, and we also plan to cooperate with US, Cyprus, and other countries. So in the next years to come, we expect that all these changes in our strategy, in our national strategy and the focus will bring fruits, and the country will become more resilient and competitive.
Thank you, Michael. The way I read what you said, one is you need to develop at the center of the power or the government a capacity to look into the future. That's one thing that you mentioned when you talked about having this foresight unit that was established, right? But also the need to modernize toolkits and institutions, from legal frameworks, incentives, but really the legal frameworks that are behind that. And you highlighted something that I think Professor Zachary has also mentioned about global collaboration with, let's say, as you ended with that. I think what I have heard from all of you, I would say there are 3 main things that come to my mind. One is this whole thing about the ecosystem, the different parts that you need to put together, right? So I wanted to explore a bit more about that with all of you. The other one is this notion of this SDGs as a common language, as an opportunity maybe to drive, to organize research, to organize innovation efforts. And the third one is actually the notion about global collaboration, right? Having, how can that be really advanced? So maybe we think as we go for another round, we got a question here. I know we'll have time to talk about that, but I wanted to turn to you again, Ray. One of the things that you mentioned in different opportunities when we were in Sao Paulo, and we just had a statement from you the other day talking about the importance of ecosystems and to have agile ecosystems, right? So how do you build those ecosystems that are not in the United States, right? So we have people coming from the emerging world who are watching this. We have countries that are transitioning maybe out of crisis like Greece. So how do you kickstart? How do you put together those different pieces, and how do you weave that?
Yeah, so I think we talked about innovation systems and an innovation mindset. And I think the innovation mindset also, people do come from different backgrounds and they need to be willing to change. And I think that's one of the most difficult things is I think there are two difficulties. One of them is the kind of not invented here syndrome, where people feel like they own something and they want to be responsible for that. And it's hard to walk away from that. So it's that ownership of something. And the second part of that might be self-disruption, which is also very difficult. I thought what I would do, by the way, I coined a phrase that I like when you think about innovation and new systems, and that is, fail early, but not often. And so I think, people talk about fail early. That's fine as long as you don't do it all the time. Right. So you have to have some successes there. And I think TI has demonstrated our ability to identify things that do need to fail early, and also have had transitioning successes already, even after less than 2 years. So the other idea that I implemented when at Lockheed Martin, which I think is an important one, it's really more for maybe existing entities as opposed to new entities. But as you said earlier, people come in with their own background and experience, and they may have had decades of experience as they come into the new position. And so I faced a challenge, and the challenge was that there was a very, very large, around 70,000 technical people inside Lockheed Martin Corporation. And many of them had been in the aerospace and defense industry for decades. And we had identified about 350 of them, which were called Lockheed Martin Fellows. And these people were the eminent people who had written the books, who had the patents, et cetera. These are, imagine, less than 1% of the entire technical population. So they are somewhat, you might say, resistant to change. We also had another group of people that we brought in. I visited the deans of engineering at a number of top schools around the US, and I asked the deans of engineering to give me recommendations regarding master's and PhD graduates who would be willing to work, wanted to work in aerospace and defense, because there are a number of people, even a few years ago, who didn't want to work in aerospace and defense, but we identified these rising stars who wanted to work in this industry. They formed a group, kind of self-named, the Next Team. And the Next Team was made up of these people with very, very strong academic backgrounds. One in particular, I won't mention his name, but he was from MIT, had a master's degree, and he was an expert in 3D manufacturing. We had an initiative inside the corporation to expand 3D manufacturing. And it wasn't exactly meeting with great resistance, but it wasn't moving in the dynamic way, talking about agility, which is your question. It wasn't moving in an agile way like we wanted it to. So what did I do? I seeded, if you will, the fellows with people from the Next Team. And so I took these young, 26 or 27-year-old master's graduate from MIT who was an expert in current developments in 3D manufacturing, and I teamed him with a 35-year veteran in manufacturing in Lockheed Martin. And what was the net result? The net result was that the fellow found out that this, young kid actually knew a lot and was very smart. And the so-called young kid found out that the fellow actually had decades of experience and was a tremendous asset. And so that was a way of infusing new ideas and keeping the system agile, if you will, so that it doesn't get bogged down. And this was a real world example where we used new talent and existing talent to blend to get a very successful implementation of 3D manufacturing inside the corporation.
That's a fantastic example coming from sure from a massive knowledge enterprise business, right? How could you maybe reflect on the possibility to translate that approach, right, to the policy space? I think that your point is, hey, you need to find game changers and really connect them and put them into positions where they could make a difference, right? When we extrapolate a bit and we go from business maybe to innovation ecosystems at large, what are maybe the connections that you see?
Well, I think the biggest connection, so I used to define invention and innovation, invention being the creation of the idea, and innovation being the application of the idea to products and services. You can think about this in a number of ways. One of the ways to do it is kind of on a TRL scale. And so you can have the early TRLs where you're thinking about something, the middle TRLs where you're doing the R&D and development, maybe TRL 4, 5, 6, you're doing a proof of concept, and then through TRL 9 is when you field the system. You have to have partnerships throughout that entire process, and you have to have people. This is why I think the triad of government, whose job it is to fund high risk, high payoff activities, academia, who brings, like we did with the MIT gentleman, the current thinking in particular areas to bear, and industry, who has the ability to commercialize these things that are thought of on this TRL scale. And so I think that you mentioned it, Katrina, about a system. And so I think this is kind of fundamental to that system, is that you have to have the ability to move along that TRL scale. And there is, in fact, room for academic partners, R&D partners, and government partners and industry partners. And like I said, I think TII actually, with our partners in Aspire and in Venture One, under the ATRC, Advanced Technology Research Council banner, I think we actually have implemented that structure in a very effective way.
Thank you, Ray. Katarina, Michael, I want to turn to you in this system design and connection perspective. What is the case? How do you do that in practice? We heard a lot from you, Michael, about the different pieces, the things that you're changing in terms of legislation, new building blocks that are being put in place. But how do you engineer the system in practice? Michael, you are muted.
Yes, I'm muted. Okay. That's a very good question. Actually, it's a great challenge to put all these pieces together. We have the businesses, we have the academics, we have also the government organizations and the society as well. So we have to put them in a collaborative environment and framework. And what we do is that we cooperate with all these stakeholders during meetings for designing the national strategy for, especially for the research and innovation. This strategy is called National Smart Specialization Strategy. It has to do with identifying the unique characteristics and assets of our country, highlighting our competitive advantages, and trying to bring together all these stakeholders in order to design this strategy from a bottom-up approach. This approach, we call it entrepreneurial discovery process. And through this process, we have identified 7 competitive sectors for Greece. The one is agri-food, the second is digital technologies, the third is environment and circular economy and sustainable energy. Biosciences, health and pharmaceutical is the fourth, materials, construction and industry, transport and logistics, and the 7th is culture, tourism and creative industries. So by providing a firm legislative framework, and at the same time by providing enough financing in order to bring all these stakeholders together and to cooperate in projects, we try to improve our competitiveness through innovation and entrepreneurship. Katerina is one of our, I would say, beneficiaries of that, because these venture capital funds are receiving money from the Greek government to some extent. They also contribute their own, of course, money. And these efforts give a ground to the startup ecosystem, and to the we address also the basic research at the same time, starting from TRL 1 to 3 and finalizing at number 8 and 9, of course. So we cover all these different TRL stages, and I think that that was the biggest challenge at the same time.
So the way I hear you, Michael, is that you need a common table for all the stakeholders to sit together in a dialogue framework, a dialogue process. That's how I heard you. Is that correct?
It is correct. That is why we have also established a National Council for this smart specialization strategy, which monitors the process and all these stakeholders' relationships. And it is already set up in order to accommodate our design and planning for the next years and to adapt our strategy as well.
Katerina, over to you. As you said, we need a system. We heard from Ray, we heard from Michael. So how do you weave that system?
Thank you, Roberto. First of all, what Michael said as pieces are really there, they are required. So you need to first have these pieces on the table. I will add 3 more ingredients in the recipe, okay, to make it happen. One is you don't just need money, but you need also, so like I will talk with my hat as a venture capital. So it's not just enough to deploy money, but you need to put the effort there for people to really develop as teams their concepts and really provide hands-on support to make it happen with them. So a hands-on approach. The second ingredient you require is people that can understand the different words and build bridges. Whether these are people that understand research, innovation, but also the market and can create these synergies and these bridges, or interdisciplinary teams that need to be developed to implement innovation. And these bridges are necessary to happen between technology, research, and people that have deep knowledge of the market and understand the market needs. So first, as I said, not just money, not just the different pieces, but a holistic approach, and also people that can build these bridges. These are the second thing. I think also a fund in that process really has a catalytic role, because it can create the success results. And if you allow me, behind the success, there are 3 factors that play a key role, and I would like to associate them with what you said before. I think we often find out, and that's a finding, that the #1 success factor has to do with the timing, with the right timing. So you need to work behind an innovation that's the right time for it. I think the great challenges that we have to face, whether this is climate change or energy, etc., the big problems, and SDG agenda is associated with such big challenges. So any innovation related to that can have much more acceptance by the market. And acceptance by the market and the big market is often another very critical success factor. The third success factor has to do with the team. I think in order to have the right team to develop the right innovation behind big challenges and have a market potential, needs the support required and the support of the ecosystem. And lastly, unless you work globally with global partnerships, a success will remain local. It won't have the impact it can have. So I think all these 3 pieces, that's how they're connected together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I think it's a great framework. So thanks for this, Katerina. We'll be back to some of those points. Zachary, I want to turn to you. We were talking here about how you connect the pieces of this puzzle, right? The pieces that are needed to build functioning innovation ecosystems at the national level. You've been doing that. You were the advisor to the Prime Minister. You are the co-chair of MITE that has a role in that, right? So how do you do that? How do you, Professor Zachary, and your colleagues, how do you weave the pieces to advance innovation?
Thank you. I would respond to that, but also remind me, the second part that I would like to address is international collaboration. Okay, but the first part, the question that you asked is most relevant, and that ecosystem, the systemic infrastructure for most countries, in particular, developing countries, it's not happening. What I'm saying here, there should be, for instance, if you are using science and technology as your underpinning for economic development, there must be a structure, let's say a National Science Council, which is manned by different ministries, different departments, interaction between government, academia, and the private sector. Preferably for smaller countries like mine, preferably it should be chaired by the Prime Minister. Secondly, there should be policies, strategies that would eventually encourage the development of science, technology, and innovation. Just take one example. One of the prerequisites for development must be investment on R&D. And we have seen that, of course, in the US is well known, but some of those countries that emerged from the Second World War, Germany is one, of course, but Japan and Korea, these countries invested a lot of money on R&D. I think they would spend anything between 2.5 to 3.5% of their GDP on R&D. But if you look at the laggard countries, in fact, you know, some of the least developed countries spend very little on R&D. So I think that's not good. Even my country, the level now is below 2% of the GDP spent on R&D. So you can't expect progress to happen if you don't have that kind of approach and ecosystem. And finally, I think in the national context, there should be a heightened linkage between the expert, the scientists, the technologists, with the policymakers, with the politicians. You know, eventually the kingmaker, the game changer, has to be the political leader, someone who would be listening, but eventually who would commit himself or herself towards those kind of investment. That is on the national scale, Roberto. I also want to highlight, while I still have the floor, and maybe it is something which Deborah would eventually respond, how could we enhance, promote international collaboration, SDG number 17? In particular, Deborah, how could GFCC play a role in that? I think we have enough experience. You have a lot of credibility. You have a lot of profile, you know. How could we make that happen? We see in mega process like the SDS forum in Kyoto, is good, but it's a good talk shop. But the question is, how do you translate into activities? How do you walk the talk? And eventually, how together us all in all our countries collaborate towards a common goal? You know, that is also eventually, I think, the value of the GFCC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zachary. Deborah, I really want to turn to you, not just to address this question, but I've been learning from you over the years about convening different stakeholders across sectors. And we heard about that from all of our speakers here today. And what Katerina said about having a common language and creating this common language across sectors. We even have a GFCC report that's called Convergence and Circulation, that really highlights this idea and But I really want to turn to you to get your comments, how you have been weaving the innovation ecosystem in the United States, but seeing that globally. And also, if you could comment a bit about what Professor Zachary said about global connections.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to say this discussion has been outstanding. And I think everybody here, would give wonderful talks at the summit in Athens. So we want to make sure you're all part of that, because I know this is on YouTube, but the knowledge, thought leadership in this session is really superb. I think what I want to comment, what I've heard, and it relates to my work professionally in my career, is that everybody's talking about how you, yes, create a systems, but it's all about systems integration. And it's really hard because people and institutions and businesses, they like to work in their stovepipe. They feel comfortable with the people that they know, with the mission they have. And it's in many ways stressful to cut across. So I'll just give an example from my own career. And this was many years ago. I was in charge of international collaboration in the White House during the time of President Reagan. And there were a lot of issues in those days with the Soviet Union and collaboration and things. And I put together, at the request of the science advisor, a strategy to look across the US government of all the things we were doing in collaboration with Soviet scientists. And now, a lot of that work was for strategic reasons. It was a way to have a window into that world. And things were, beginning to change also, as we moved towards the end of the Soviet Union. But I cannot tell you how much hostility there was in the US government agencies. They didn't want to come to the meeting. They gave all the reasons why what they were doing was just fine. And it was, my boss was getting complaints about me, who is this young woman who wants us to say so it was an example that we had a system in the country of working with the Soviet Union in science and technology, but there was no coordination and there was no integration of it. And so that is really hard work. And I can give many other examples. And what I've been hearing in the discussion today is that each one of our leaders here is actually practicing building a system and integrating it. And that's where success comes. I'm very, very interested in the Foresight Council, the new council that you mentioned, Michael. I hope we'll hear more about that when we're in Athens. I know, of course, Zachary is a tremendous systems integrator, and what he's done in Malaysia, yes, on science and technology, but also on environment and sustainability issues. So the GFCC, and I would say, councils on competitiveness by design are meant to be systems integrators. They're meant to bring together diverse stakeholders, sectors, ideas, and things. And then how you begin to meld from that a strategy or policy. And, I'll brag a little bit here because Ray Johnson has been a dear friend and partner in the Council on Competitiveness. We have a little magic on that, how we do it. And, it's not a science, as it were, but it's recognizing that, along the continuum of research and development that Katerina talked about, each partner has different goals and missions, and you have to be respectful of those. You can't say to an academic, well, publishing in a paper is irrelevant, but you have to also respect that a engineer at Lockheed Martin that's collaborating with a university can't wait for 10 years to have a result. So again, this is melding all these different priorities and things. So the GFCC absolutely has a role to play in this. I hope, coming out of our meeting in Athens and moving into 2023, we do begin now. We've developed a lot of thought leadership, a lot of policies, a lot of strategy. And I do hope that, perhaps it's the Innovating Out of Crisis initiative, that we do some things that are very tactical. And as Zachary said, and others, coming out with some tangible results in the areas, of competitiveness, in addition to our thought leadership. And the last thing I want to say, because this is a theme of our meeting in Athens, and it's what we're all doing, and we're doing it in our daily work and in our countries and regions, is we have an expression now in the United States, and our new director of the National Science Foundation, who unfortunately can't be with us in Athens, but a dear friend and colleague, he talks about the missing millions. And one of the Council on Competitiveness members, Michael Crow from Arizona State University, when we started our National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers, said, look at the United States. Let's use the analogy of baseball or football. We have all these competitive teams, but we don't even have 10% of our population playing. And that's a moral wrong, and it's a economic wrong, it's a social wrong. So how do we involve the missing millions into the innovation ecosystems we're talking about? And really, when you then move to the global arena, how do we involve the billions? And that, I think, is really the challenge of our day in the future. And we have to think of national, but we also have to think about place-based innovation. And I'll conclude with one examples in the United States. We have a whole network of what are called historically Black colleges and universities that were established after our Civil War. Some, have more infrastructure than others, but they kind of operate as closed systems. And we're trying as a nation, to integrate this into our system. But just putting more money into those institutions, as Katarina said, is not the answer. It's how do you take the people that are there and involve them in the quantum institutes that are being built across the country, or the regional innovation technology engines that NSF is starting. They need to be brought into the interconnective tissue of not just in a separate institution. And I think that's true, for everything we're talking about here. So it's going to be very exciting when we're in Athens, in addition to having this global and national conversation. I hope everybody can come on the field trip to Ioannina and Epirus, because we're going to see what's happening there on the ground. And it's pretty amazing. And I know one of our university presidents from the US that's coming, Michael Amaritis, who's now president of University of South Carolina, had been at, he told me on the phone this week of all the things that he'd been doing at University of Illinois with the University of Ioannina in medical science. I had no idea, but that's an example. So Zachary, thank you for putting me on the spot here, as you always do. But I'm so thrilled that we're having this discussion. Roberto, thank you for your leadership. I know we've gone over time, but boy, are we going to have a great time in Greece. And Ray, don't think we're not going to come to Abu Dhabi sooner than later.
You're good. We're looking forward to welcoming you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's do this. Let's have, if it's okay, 30, 45 seconds, each one of you, just for some closing ideas.
I'm just waiting for the picture.
Okay. But before we did that, I just want to raise a few things. We got questions here about global collaboration. Have that in mind when you go for your final remarks. We had a question about ISO framework 56 series, right? 56,000 and others, and also what's being done in Greece to advance, let's say, things that are closer to the market, right? So maybe I could get started with you, Michael, your final ideas in our lightning round.
Yes, of course, I do agree that the ISO, which concerns innovation management system requirements, will be very important in building competitiveness. Of course, it's not the only thing that can do that alone, but of course, it's a very important ingredient in that respect. As far as the other question about the TRL 7+, what is the strategy of the Greek government? Today we announced a call for research projects addressing TRLs 7, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it can be answered this question today, and we provide them grants. But at the same time, as mentioned earlier, we have the venture capital funds, like the one Ms. Pramatari is participating as a partner, which can also finance TRL 7 and 8 in startup and scale-up companies. So there are two ways the founders can choose what they like most. Thank you.
Great examples. One final idea and a recommendation for everybody, Michael.
The recommendation is to look into the future and design their strategy with very careful steps today.
Professor Zachary, over to you. Your final remarks.
Yes, I think how would international collaboration impact on local situation. I just give you one example. In our meeting today, listening in is the Vice Chancellor of University Technology, Petronas. Petronas, as you know, is a Fortune 500 company and very successful. Recently, in a meeting with the staff and students, I asked them the relevance of their research. I was pleasantly surprised, amazed, when they told me how one of their research product involving solar energy, they apply the contraption to a group of indigenous people on the fringe of the jungle. That was really a powerful, and I would tell Professor Ibrahim, the Vice Chancellor, that kind of thing could resonate elsewhere in the rest of the world. So we need to have more of that, Roberto. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakri. Great to have you here, Ibrahim. University of Technology Petronas. It's a GFCC university member. We're proud to have you. Ray, over to you. Final ideas and maybe a final recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've seen over the last few years, maybe 5 or 6 years, is a world that is becoming more polarized. And the polarization is pulling us in the wrong direction. As I mentioned in my introductory comments, I think the idea of competitiveness now is working for win-win solutions for global partners. And we set the tone for this in the United States with government, industry, academia partnerships, and that worked quite well. But even those are being pulled, and there's tension between government funding and in certain areas, et cetera. And so I think we need to realize that the enemy is not us. The enemy is represented in the SDGs and other issues that the world faces that we all need to support together.
I think this is a very powerful idea, Ray. So you were saying that we need to reframe the game, reframe how we see and really talk about the things that we're talking here today. So
especially how we think about the word competitiveness and what it means.
And I'll just say, Ray, that's very important because competitiveness is as you said in your opening remarks, you can have great economic growth and accelerated productivity, but if you don't have prosperous people, and not just prosperous in terms of tangible things, but prosperous in their well-being, in their thriving in life. And we're thrilled in Athens for Athens that Jim Clifton, the chairman of Gallup Corporation, is going to be with us, and they've just done some amazing research called Blind Spot. And that's that they've done a study all over the world that the majority of people in the world are not happy, no matter what their socioeconomic status is. So this concept that we have to look beyond just the economic component of competitiveness is absolutely critical.
Katerina, over to you.
I really want to build on what Deborah said about the missing millions. I think there is only one way we can address the global challenges, and that's by engaging the missing millions. And because I work a lot with young people, with young students at the age of 20, you clearly see that young people won't get on that train in order to gain a lot of money. They will only do it to create impact and address the big challenges. And I think these concepts about SDG really redefine why we do what we do. And unless we work globally and we align globally behind this purpose, this won't happen.
Any short recommendations on how to do that?
Yes, just an example. 10 years ago, no Greek student wanted to join this path. They all wanted a good job in the public sector. The university environment was very hostile. By engaging students and giving them as challenges, real problems related to environment from companies that they don't want to do something for their own purpose, but really address big issues out there, young people are motivated. By doing that, then you need to have a system to support them innovate further and build their ideas and help them globally have this impact. I don't know
Thank
if that
you,
was
Katrin.
practical.
That's wonderful. I have one key takeaway from this whole conversation. It will not happen by chance. We need to act on purpose. We need leadership. We need structures to be created to make things happen. As Michael said, government structures, foresight, or whatever, but we need to weigh things. And again, I think, but we also need new thinking, as you have said, Ray, Zachary, Katharina. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing, this conversation will be continued and we will share here.
And we need our traditional picture because you
We
forgot
will.
last time, Roberto.
We will. And we will share here the link for everybody, because our next session before we meet in Greece is actually about weaving this, creating the connections. It's about the enablers to advance the agenda that we have talked here today. In October, we're having that. We'll share the link on the chat, so please stay tuned. And before we go, our GFCC picture, so please open your cameras for my colleagues Riley and Simone, who are here today. Let's smile and look at the camera. It was a pleasure to have you all here with us. Stay tuned for the GFCC Building Competitiveness series and our Global Innovation Summit in Athens and Yanina. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.